Lightsabers clash and blasters sing in a galaxy far away. It's everything. Heroes rise and some villains do too. We'll sip our tea and talk to you. It's tea time on Tatooine. Use the Force, live the dream from hot's cold to Endor's green. It's tea time on Tatooine. It's tea time on Tatooine. Use the Force, live the dream from hot's cold to Endor's green. It's tea time on Tatooine. Yoda's wisdom and Vader's might. Ewoks dancing in the moonlight. Hyperspace and rebel scum. Pour your tea and off we'll run. Grab a cup and join the fun. Under twin suns we are one. Stars above and tails between. Tea time on Tatooine.
Welcome to Tea Time on Tatooine, bringing fans together from galaxies far, far away. I'm your host, Anna Trumbo, and today is a bit of a special episode because for the first time, it's just me. No guests, no interviews, just us hanging out and diving into a really exciting corner of the Star Wars universe. Before we get started, however, I gotta give a shout out to new Patreon subscribers Sam, Jesus, David, and Faith. You wonderful Padawans and Jedi Knights help keep the lights on. Thank you. Today, I'm going to talk about something that's been quietly flying under the radar for a lot of fans, especially those who might be feeling a little burnt out or, let's be honest, a bit cranky after years of Star Wars discourse. I'm talking about the High Republic. It spans across books, comics, and even TV shows like Young Jedi Adventures. So what exactly is the High Republic? It's a multi-phase project launched in 2020 that explores a time period we've never seen in the movies, set about 200 years before The Phantom Menace. It's divided into 3 distinct phases, each representing a different era within this period. And what I love is that this project is truly for everyone. We've got adult novels, young adult novels, middle grade books, comics, and children's books with sticker pages in the back. Which is just, come on. I'm a millennial. We love stickers. Each one tells a different part of the story, and they all fit together to create this massive interconnective narrative. And while this content is aimed at different age groups, we're not getting the same story told in different versions for adults and kids. Each piece adds something new to the puzzle, enriching the overall experience without feeling repetitive. It's honestly kind of brilliant, and it's a major new direction for Star Wars storytelling that feels completely new, something different from the Skywalker saga. And so far, it's managed to mostly steer clear of a lot of that toxic online drama, which is, as they say, chef's kiss, at least in my corner of the internet. So let's talk about the very first novel that kicked off this initiative, The Light of the Jedi by Charles Soule, released in early 2021. If you haven't read it yet, don't worry, I'll give you a high-level overview without spoilers, for now. But fair warning, there will be spoilers aplenty ahead. The Light of the Jedi introduces us to this brand new era where the Jedi are at the height of their power and the Republic is flourishing. But, of course, not everything is peaceful, and a new kind of threat emerges that the Jedi must face. It's action-packed, filled with new characters, and it really sets the tone for this expansive new era of storytelling. So, grab your tea, get cozy, and let's dive into the High Republic. I'll give you a spoiler warning when we get there, so you'll have plenty of time to jump into hyperspace if you want to avoid specifics. All right, let's get started. The galaxy is at peace, ruled by the glorious Republic and protected by the noble and wise Jedi Knights. As a symbol of all that is good, the Republic is about to launch Starlight Beacon into the far reaches of the Outer Rim. This new space station will serve as a ray of hope for all to see. But just as a magnificent renaissance spreads throughout the Republic, so does a frightening new adversary. Now, the guardians of peace and justice must face a threat to themselves, the galaxy, and the Force itself. One of the most striking things about The Light of the Jedi is how the opening chapters unfold. The story is told from varying first-person perspectives, and each chapter begins with a countdown to a cataclysmic event known as the Great Disaster. It starts with 3 hours to impact, then 2.5 hours to impact, and so on. The tension builds as you realize something terrible is coming, an event that will affect not only the people we meet in these chapters, but the entire galaxy. This disaster takes place over the agricultural planet of Hetzal, which has 2 moons, the Fruited and the Rooted, and plays a major role in supplying food to the Outer Rim. Without giving too much away just yet, the disaster is a massive hyperspace accident, an unprecedented event that sends the galaxy into chaos. But what I love about these early chapters is the pacing. You can feel the urgency and the desperation of the characters as they react to what's happening in real time. You're not just reading about the disaster, you're experiencing it with them. You're basically clutching the book like it's your Jedi training saber, hoping you make it out alive. At the same time, we're introduced to one of the major new locations in the High Republic era, Starlight Beacon. Now, this isn't just some fancy space station, although it is very fancy. It's a symbol of hope, built by the Republic to bring stability and peace to the Outer Rim territories, which are still considered pretty wild and untamed at this point in history. Think of it as the galaxy's ultimate Wi-Fi booster, but instead of just better signal, it's boosting communication, security, and peace. Starlight Beacon represents everything that the Jedi and the Republic stand for: unity, safety, and progress. It's where the Jedi will base themselves to respond quickly to threats in the Outer Rim. As the chapters progress, we're thrown headfirst into the fallout from the disaster and how the Jedi and the Republic try to respond to it. There's a lot more to uncover, and we'll get into those juicy details as we move forward. But here's the deal. This is your spoiler warning. From this point on, we're diving into the deeper waters. If you haven't read The Light of the Jedi yet and want to avoid plot details, now's your chance to hit pause and come back later. Still with me? Let's go. Part 1, The Great Disaster. As we find out fairly early on, the galaxy-wide disaster is triggered by a ship, a massive freighter called the Legacy Run that breaks apart while traveling through hyperspace. Now, pieces of that ship are being hurled into real space at unimaginable speeds, impacting with the kind of force that could easily destroy planets. And these aren't just small pieces. Some of these chunks are big enough to cause system-shattering chaos if they aren't intercepted in time. The first part of the book is all about damage control. The Jedi, in true heroic form, get the call and rush to the scene over the planet Hetzal, which is on a direct collision course with some of this runaway hyperspace debris. We see Jedi Masters, Knights, and even civilian pilots spring into action, trying to prevent a massive catastrophe. It's an all-hands-on-deck situation with everyone scrambling to save as many lives as possible. As the story unfolds, we get to experience the disaster through the eyes of several characters, each with their own unique perspective. There's Avar Kriss, a Jedi Master at the heart of the Jedi response, cool under pressure and coordinating the effort to stop the disaster like a seasoned conductor guiding an orchestra. Then there's Bel Zettifar, a Jedi apprentice who's still finding his way but has the guidance of his mentor, the formidable Loden Greatstorm. They're flying low over the planet, using the Force to search for people in need of help. Alongside them, we've got Jedi Master Te'ami flying into action with 2 other Masters and a Wookiee Padawan named Buryaga. All the Jedi fly in little 1 to 2 person ships called Vectors, beautiful crafts only capable of being flown by a Jedi. And then, outside the Jedi ranks, there are civilian volunteers caught in the thick of it, along with a few officials on Hetzal, all trying to manage the unthinkable as debris rains down from hyperspace. The story jumps between these perspectives, fleshing out the sense of desperation and showing us the disaster from all angles. Let's start with Avar Kriss. Human, around 30, a relatively new master, fairly paragonal. She's one of the most prominent Jedi in the High Republic era, and for good reason. Avar experiences the Force in a way that's unique. She sees it as a symphony, with every living being contributing to its song. It's this deep, almost musical connection that gives her the ability to coordinate large-scale efforts in ways that few others could. But what's interesting is that each Jedi experiences the Force differently. For Avar, it's this beautiful symphony, while others might see it as something more primal, like fire or water or forest. The variety in how they connect to the Force is really a core part of what makes these Jedi so interesting and different from what we've seen in other eras. Bel Zettifar, on the other hand, is still trying to grasp his relationship with the Force. As a teenaged human apprentice under Loden Greatstorm, an imposing Twi'lek, he's learning the hard way that being a Jedi isn't just about mastering the Force, it's about trusting it. Loden is a legend in his own right, a Jedi master who's calm in a crisis but demands excellence from his students. His relationship with Bel is central to the story, and it's through their bond that we see how much the master-apprentice dynamic means in this era. Teami, Burryaga, Buri for short because all Wookiees need nicknames apparently, and a couple of other Jedi are working alongside volunteer pilots, leading part of the rescue effort. And here's just one example of the batshit crazy nonsense they pull off. A civilian ship teams up with 3 Jedi vectors to destroy a massive piece of debris hurtling towards one of Hetzal's populated moons. They're all set to blast it apart, but right before they do, the Jedi are overwhelmed by waves of fear radiating off of Buri. Initially, they chalk it up to his youth and inexperience, but they quickly realize this isn't just wreckage from the Legacy run. It's a cargo hold, and it's packed with terrified people. What the Jedi thought was Buri's fear wasn't his own at all. It was him sensing the fear of those trapped inside the debris. What follows is an absolutely nerve-wracking, nail-biting, 1-in-a-billion-shot rescue operation. The Jedi and pilots pull off the kind of last-second save that keeps you glued to the pages. The whole sequence is filled with tension as we jump between different characters, watching them race to stop hyperspace debris from causing even more devastation. It's a fast-paced montage of ships, explosions, and Jedi using every bit of their power to keep things from spiraling out of control. In this first part of The Light of the Jedi, the stakes are all about getting people to safety before everything comes crashing down, literally. And this is where I want to pause and talk about how the High Republic approaches the Jedi differently from other eras. One of the things that really stands out to me is just how deeply and uniquely connected they are to the Force. We see it with Avar Kriss and her experience of the Force as a symphony, but it's not just her. Every Jedi in this era has their own personal connection to the Force, and it shapes the way they use it. Take Elzar Mann, for example, a character we haven't met yet, but will soon. He sees the Force like an ocean. It's vast, unpredictable, and constantly shifting. It gives him this fluidity in how he approaches challenges, almost like he's diving into the depths of the Force rather than trying to control them. Then you have Burryaga, our Wookiee Padawan, who experiences the Force like a forest, rich and teeming with life. His gift lies in feeling the emotions of others deeply, which makes him an incredibly empathetic Jedi and a crucial part of the team in these high-stakes situations. And it doesn't stop there. Avar can link everyone together through the Force, almost like a conductor pulling all of these different notes into the harmony. Meanwhile, we know Yoda has a similar ability to Avar's, using his deep connection to the Force to sense what's happening on a broader scale. Yes, Yoda is around. Remember how old our little green friend is?
When 900 years old you reach, look as good you are not,
It's not just about power or skill, it's about how each Jedi's connection to the Force shapes their strengths and how they contribute. Whether it's Loden Greatstorm's confident mastery or Bel Zettifar's journey to find his own place in the Force, each Jedi adds something unique to the story, and together they create this really dynamic, multifaceted approach to being guardians of peace. It's that diversity in how they connect to the Force that makes them so effective, and so different from the Jedi we see in other eras. Now, to be fair, we do see some of this in other Star Wars stories. Some Jedi have unique strengths, whether it's someone who can sense the history of an object just by touching it, someone who's especially good at influencing animals, or those with a talent for reading emotions and projecting calm. But in the High Republic, it's made clear that every Jedi has their own unique abilities and strengths within the Force. It's not just something that's hinted at through their actions, it's acknowledged as part of their individuality. This really adds depth to the idea that the Force isn't just one thing. It's something vast, and it flows differently through each Jedi. And that's what makes this era's Jedi feel so dynamic and in tune with the galaxy. And then we get to one of the most mind-blowing displays of Force power I've ever read or seen in Star Wars. As the Jedi are working to clear the debris, they discover that one of the larger pieces of wreckage, a massive container filled with dangerous, highly explosive gas, is on a direct collision course with a nearby sun. If this container hits, it'll trigger a chain reaction that could cause the sun to expand and potentially wipe out the entire Hetzal system. The stakes don't get much higher than that. Avar Kriss, using her unique ability to sense the Force as a kind of symphony, manages to mentally link Jedi across the galaxy to redirect the container, which is moving at close to light speed, and save the system. It's this massive feat of coordination with all of the Jedi working together as one, some dying from the extreme effort. And it's honestly one of the most jaw-dropping moments in the book. And when I say all of the Jedi, I mean every single Jedi in the galaxy, stretching from the outer rim to the core worlds. The level of power and connection to the Force is beyond anything we've seen in the prequel-era Jedi. This concerted effort is broadcast galaxy-wide by Kevin Tarr, a scientist in the Hetzal capital who thinks, "We might all die, but if we do, the galaxy should know what happened here today." And thanks to the Jedi, the Hetzal system was spared from further devastation. But other systems weren't so lucky. For example, the planet of Abdalis was struck by a glancing blow from one of the pieces of debris, and 20 million people were killed. This was the first of what would come to be known as the emergences. And in the chaos that followed, a rescue and recovery mission was attacked by a group of ships with distinctive markings. 3 bright slashes of blue war paint. These markings, along with the masks and armor worn by the attackers, identify them as the Nihil. More on them later, but the bottom line, not every system had a ship full of Jedi nearby to pull off a heroic rescue. The Nihil are unlike anything we've seen in Star Wars before. They're not Sith, they're not remnants of the Empire, and they're certainly not just some run-of-the-mill crime syndicate. The Nihil are something darker, marauders, thieves, and murderers who thrive on chaos and destruction. Led by Marchion Ro, the enigmatic figure known as the Eye, they don't follow any grand ideology. They live by one brutal creed: take what you want, destroy the rest. But the real terror of the Nihil doesn't just come from their savagery. Their power lies in something called the Paths, secret twisting hyperspace routes that let them appear and vanish like ghosts. And here's the chilling part: Marchion Ro isn't just leading the Nihil, he's fully controlling them, pulling the strings behind the chaos. He's the mastermind who engineered the Great Disaster. We'll find out more about this later, sending the galaxy spiraling into fear and uncertainty. We'll come back to the Nihil later because there's a lot more to unpack about them. But before we get too deep in the weeds, I want to take a moment to acknowledge The Great Jedi Rescue by Cavan Scott. This is a children's book that retells many of the same events from the light of the Jedi, focusing on the Jedi's heroic efforts to save Hetzal Prime. It's a great introduction for younger readers who may not be ready for the full complexity of the High Republic books. Plus, if they're into stickers, and, well, honestly, who isn't, this book comes with a sticker set at the back. Have I mentioned I love stickers? No? Well, I fucking love stickers. So, it's got something for everyone. All right, now let's talk about the Jedi in this era, because this is where the High Republic really starts to feel like something different. Throughout this section of the book, the Jedi demonstrate abilities that feel way more powerful and connected to the Force than we've seen in other Star Wars stories, especially compared to the prequel era. For instance, we have Loden Greatstorm, who casually identifies 8 marauders hiding within a crowd of over 100 people and lifts them into the air, dropping them as soon as they're high enough to cause significant damage without killing them. And without hitting anyone else on the way down, mind you. His Padawan, Belzettifar, can instantly assess their injuries with just a thought. There's this level of ease and mastery with the Force that makes these Jedi feel like they're at their peak. In the High Republic, the Jedi aren't just warriors or soldiers, they're peacekeepers, explorers, researchers, and guardians. They have this deep, almost effortless connection to the Force. As stated, Avar Kriss experiences it as a symphony of music, Elzar Mann feels it as a vast ocean, and Burryaga, the Wookiee, senses it as a lush forest. These unique interpretations of the Force highlight the individuality of each Jedi and give us a deeper sense of how they interact with the energy that binds the galaxy together. And it's not just that they experience the Force differently, it's that their connection to the Force itself is stronger, more fluid in this era. This ties into the larger concept of the living Force and the cosmic Force. Hold on to your butts, because here's where it gets pretty damn nerdy. The living Force is the energy generated by all living things, present and immediate, guiding the Jedi in the moment. The cosmic Force, on the other hand, is more grand and overarching. It's what binds the galaxy together across time and space, the will of the Force, if you will. These two aspects of the Force are complementary and feed into each other, creating a cycle of life and death. They are always there, but in the High Republic, the Jedi are more in tune with the living Force, allowing them to react quickly and creatively to the challenges they face. This distinction between the living Force and the cosmic Force is key to understanding why the Jedi of the High Republic seem so much more powerful. They're in harmony with the living Force, acting as true peacekeepers. They're not bogged down by politics or bureaucracy like the Jedi we see in the prequels. But as time moves forward, we start to see the Order shift its focus. They become more aligned with the cosmic Force, focusing on the big picture and trying to maintain balance across the galaxy, likely in reaction to the presence of rising dark side energy that comes in the years preceding the Phantom Menace. And while that might sound noble, it starts to distance them from the needs of individuals and systems in the moment. As we move closer to the prequel era, this shift away from the living Force and towards the cosmic Force starts to weaken the Jedi. Their connection to life, to the present, begins to erode, and they get caught up in the politics of the Republic. By the time we meet the Jedi in the prequels, they're not the same guardians of peace we see in the High Republic. Instead, they're cautious, disconnected, and often reactive rather than proactive. That shift ultimately leaves them vulnerable to manipulation by Palpatine, to the rise of the Empire, and to their own downfall. In the High Republic, the Jedi have the freedom to act as they see fit, using their abilities for the greater good without worrying about political consequences or optics. It's a time of true peacekeeping, where their connection to the living Force guides them without hesitation. But as we move forward in time, that freedom is replaced by bureaucracy and a loss of that deep spiritual connection. The Jedi themselves are even aware of it. Can you imagine the panic and fear that would induce? And then to have to suppress that fear because, as we well know,
Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
which takes us straight to the dark side. And that's part of what makes this era so interesting. It's a look at the Jedi at their best before they lose their way. And that brings us to the end of part 1, the Great Disaster. We've covered the chaos, the heroism, and we've had our first real encounter with the Nihil. But there's a lot more to come, and in part 2, we'll start to see the fallout from the disaster and dig deeper into who the Nihil really are, along with what their plans might mean for the galaxy. So if you thought things were intense so far, buckle up. It's about to get even intenser. Part 2, the Paths. As the immediate fallout from the Great Disaster continues, we're introduced to a key figure in this era of Star Wars, Supreme Chancellor Lina Soh. Now, for those more familiar with the prequel era, where the relationship between the Jedi and the Republic is, well, let's just say dysfunctional at best, Soh and the Republic she leads feel like a refreshing change. What stands out about Chancellor Soh is her genuine, forward-thinking desire to unite the galaxy in a way that feels hopeful and idealistic, something we haven't seen in a Supreme Chancellor, even before Palpatine. She's not interested in control or manipulation. Her goal is to bring all systems together in a spirit of unity and cooperation. Her motto, which you'll hear a lot in the High Republic, is, "We are all the Republic." It's meant to bind the galaxy together, especially the often neglected Outer Rim worlds. And one of the most tangible symbols of her vision is Starlight Beacon. This isn't just a space station, it's a beacon of hope, both literally and figuratively. Positioned in the outer rim, it provides resources, protection, and a sense of belonging to those far-flung systems that have always felt disconnected from the core worlds. The Jedi and the Republic work hand in hand here, a relationship that is much more harmonious than the strained, politically driven partnership we are used to. Now, while Lena So's vision is hopeful and inspiring, there's an underlying tension the book hints at but doesn't fully explore. What if some of those outer rim systems don't want to be part of the Republic? What if the idea of unity and centralized governance isn't as appealing to everyone as it is to So? The High Republic's ideal of we are all the Republic doesn't really address the question of what happens if certain worlds prefer independence. It's a dynamic that could come into play as we move forward in the era. And here's the thing. History gives us a pretty clear answer to what happens when systems don't want to be part of the Republic. It's called the Separatist Movement, which leads to the Clone Wars, killing billions across the galaxy. Of course, that's a couple hundred years down the line, but the seeds are definitely there. At this point in the High Republic, it's hard to tell if there's any resentment about this massive expansion. As we begin part 2 of The Light of the Jedi, the scope of the Great Disaster grows, and we start to see the wider galactic implications. The Outer Rim is especially vulnerable, as hyperspace lanes are closed and supplies begin to run low. These far-reaching systems, already heavily reliant on those lanes for connection to the core, are now left isolated and at risk. This creates a real challenge for Chancellor So. Her idealistic vision of we are all the Republic starts to show cracks. She has to decide whether to keep the hyperlanes closed for safety or reopen them, risking more disasters to avoid cutting off these systems completely. Either way, the Outer Rim doesn't have the same level of support as the Inner Rim or core worlds, so these decisions have massive stakes. It's a political balancing act that puts pressure on So's grand vision of unity. On one hand, keeping the lanes closed protects the galaxy from further catastrophes. On the other, reopening them keeps systems from becoming easy prey for opportunistic criminal elements, groups like the Nihil, for instance. It's a classic case of damned if you do, damned if you don't, and it adds another layer of tension to an already precarious situation. While So is grappling with this political dilemma, the galaxy is about to be introduced to a threat unlike any it's ever seen. The Nihil are about to make their move, and the balance of power in the galaxy is going to shift in ways no one could predict. As we touched on earlier, the Nihil are a group unlike anything we've seen in Star Wars. Marauders, pirates, and murderers who thrive on chaos. Led by the enigmatic Marchion Ro, known as the Eye, they wield terrifying power thanks to the Paths, secret hyperspace routes that let them appear and disappear across the galaxy without a trace. And as we already know, Ro was the mastermind behind the Great Disaster, sending the galaxy into a spiral of fear and confusion. And here's where it gets really interesting. As I mentioned, Marchion Ro is not just leading the Nihil, he's manipulating them. He controls the Tempest Runners, the 3 commanders who lead the different factions of the Nihil. Lorna D, the terrifying Twi'lek, Pan Eta, the most fashionable demon-looking alien you've ever seen, and Kassav Miliko, a wrinkly, constantly high on spice, nasty piece of work. Each run their own operations, or tempests, but they all answer to Ro. And while they might think they have the upper hand, Ro keeps them in line by controlling the paths, playing them against each other when necessary. The Nihil's structure is simple. At the top, you've got the Tempest Runners, Lorna, Pan, and Kassav. But beneath them, things get more cutthroat. Below the runners are the storms, then the clouds, and finally, the strikes. Rising through the ranks in the Nihil isn't just about brute strength or skill. It's also about who you can recruit and the reputation you build. Strikes bring new members into the Nihil, and once they've recruited enough, they become clouds. From there, if a cloud builds a big enough name for themselves, they can become a storm. But it's not enough to succeed. You also have to make sure your competition fails. That's how you survive in the Nihil. The Nihil aren't like the Empire or the Sith. They're not trying to take over the galaxy or impose some grand vision. Instead, they operate with a self-serving ethos, driven by chaos, destruction, and a thirst for power. Marchion Ro thrives on this, and his mastery of the paths is what makes him truly dangerous. It's the one thing that keeps the Tempest Runners in check, and as long as he controls the paths, he holds all the cards. But remember, Marchion is also the mastermind behind the Great Disaster. He's the one who orchestrated the destruction of the Legacy Run, throwing the galaxy into chaos. And because the Republic and the Jedi don't yet understand what's happening, hyperspace, the very lifeblood of the galaxy, is suddenly in question. One of the more fascinating things about this conflict is how it's not a typical war or rebellion. Instead, it's a galactic mystery where hyperspace itself seems to be sick. Hyperspace is fundamental to how the galaxy functions, how people travel, how trade works, how civilizations connect. And now, after the Great Disaster, it feels like hyperspace is a threat. Systems are being cut off, ships are afraid to jump, and the Republic is scrambling to figure out what's going on. It's a kind of threat we've never really seen in Star Wars before. The galaxy is at peace. There's no war, no massive galactic conflict, no Star Wars. But this disaster is forcing everyone to get creative, especially the Jedi. They're peacekeepers in this era, not soldiers, and they've never had to deal with something on this scale. There's a sense of confusion, desperation, and most of all, uncertainty. What do you do when the thing you rely on the most, hyperspace, might be broken? As we move deeper into Part 2, the galaxy is still reeling from the Great Disaster, but the real threat is only just beginning to emerge. Hyperspace itself is in question, and at the center of it all is Marchion Ro and his Nihil. We're about to see how the Republic, the Jedi, and the galaxy at large respond to this unprecedented challenge, because the chaos is just getting started. While the galaxy reels from the Great Disaster, we see the Jedi take on this crisis with gusto. Their creativity, autonomy, and positive public sentiment are on full display. And one reason they're riding high in public opinion is Kevin Tarr's broadcast from the earlier rescue, where the entire galaxy got to see the Jedi save billions of lives by stopping that container of gas from hitting the sun. But this era is fascinating because it's not just about their power, it's about how much freedom they have to act as they see fit. The galaxy trusts them, the Republic trusts them, and they're seen as heroes. This is one of the things I love about the High Republic era, the optimism and trust people have in the Jedi. We're more used to seeing them as wary, constrained, and tangled up in politics, especially in the prequels. But here, they're free to just be Jedi. They operate with such confidence and creativity, and it makes you wonder what went wrong between now and the prequel era to lose that trust. At what point did the Jedi become a little too entangled with the Republic? As the action ramps up, the Jedi and Republic are doing everything they can to understand what happened and prevent future disasters. This is where we really see Jedi Masters Avar Kriss and Elzar Mann step into leading roles. Alongside Kevin Tarr, the brilliant scientist from Hetzal now working on the disaster effort from Coruscant, they hatch a plan to predict future emergences using a massive array of navidroids. Kevin Tarr figures out that with enough processing power, about 50,000 new model navidroids, they can predict where the next pieces of hyperspace debris will appear, and when. It's a race against time as the Jedi and the Republic gather the droids and set up the array, trying to stay one step ahead of the chaos. The only problem is there aren't quite enough droids and they aren't all exactly top of the line. The array keeps overheating and is in danger of combusting. But then we see Avar and Elzar at their absolute best. They use the Force to create a rainstorm, literally pushing the air up in the atmosphere to condense into clouds and rain down, cooling the array and allowing the droids to finish their task. It's one of those moments that's just, is there any other word for it than insane? Seeing the Jedi use their powers in ways that are so much more imaginative than what we're used to seeing. I mean, a Force rainstorm? It's moments like this that show the potential of what the Jedi can do when they're really in tune with the Force. And it's not just about power. It's about the trust they have in the Force and in each other. Avar and Elzar, along with another Jedi called Stellan Gios, who we won't meet in this novel, grew up together as younglings and were inseparable. They have this incredibly deep bond, both to the Force and to each other, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But you really get a sense that these Jedi are fluid in their thinking and willing to experiment with how they use the Force. Compare that to the more rigid, by-the-book approach we see later on, and you really feel the shift. With all of the locations and times of the future emergences calculated, Avar and Elzar are tasked with speaking to the San Tekka family, legendary hyperspace prospectors who helped map the hyperspace routes connecting the galaxy. They suspect the San Tekkas may know more about the Great Disaster than they're letting on, but the family denies having any knowledge. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Turns out the San Tekkas were hiding something. This is where the Nihil's real power comes into focus. As we discussed earlier, the Nihils are marauders and pirates, but what makes them truly dangerous are the paths, the secret hyperspace routes that allow them to appear and disappear across the galaxy. These paths come from Marie San Tekka, the ancient matriarch of the San Tekka family, who was kidnapped years ago by Marchion Ro's father and has been held captive aboard Ro's ship, the Gaze Electric, for decades. Marie has this unique ability to chart hyperspace routes that no one else can, putting the San Tekka clan on the map years ago. But Marchion Ro now controls her, using her gift to keep the Nihil one step ahead of everyone else. This part is fascinating because it gives us this new kind of villain in Marchion. Like I said, he's not a Sith, he's not a warlord trying to take over the galaxy. He's a manipulator, using technology, hyperspace knowledge, and personal leverage to maintain control. There's something much more cerebral about his brand of evil, and it makes him all the more terrifying. That and his dead black eyes. That's also pretty scary. While all of this is happening, we get to see Loden Greatstorm and his apprentice Bel-Zettifar stationed on Elfrona. Loden is one of the standout Jedi masters of this era. Wise, powerful, and always pushing his apprentice to be better. Bel, on the other hand, is struggling with his training, particularly with mastering controlled descent, the ability to use the Force to land safely after a fall. In a critical moment during a daring rescue mission, Bel leaps out of a Jedi vector to save a young girl who has been thrown from a Nihil ship. As they're falling, Bel finally masters the ability, saving them both in a truly heroic moment. Over his comlink, Loden, proud as ever, tells Bel he's ready for the Jedi trials and calls him a Jedi Knight. But the real focus of the section is the race to find the Legacy Run's flight recorder. The Republic now has the ability to predict future emergences, thanks to Kevin Tarr's droid array, but the Nihil are trying to stay one step ahead. Lorna D, one of Marchion Ro's Tempest runners, launches an attack to destroy the flight recorder. In a heartbreaking moment, Jedi Master Teami, who we met in Part 1, sacrifices her life to protect the mission, and though the Jedi manage to retrieve the recorder, it's a costly victory. This is a big turning point. The Republic and the Jedi now have proof that the Nihil were behind the disaster. It's no longer a mystery, and the hunt for the Nihil begins in earnest. What I find fascinating here is how much the stakes escalate. The Jedi are peacekeepers, but now they're being drawn into a fight that's going to push them to their limits. Then we get to Kassav Miliko. He's a piece of shit. Always high on whatever the Star Wars version of an 8-ball is, he's selfish, violent, and creepy as hell. He tries to extort the governor of Eriadu, telling her he can stop an incoming emergence in exchange for a huge sum of credits. But his crew botches the job. I guess precision targeting is tough if you're fucked up out of your gourd. A piece of debris destroys Eriadu's inhabited moon, killing over 1 billion people. The governor chillingly vows revenge, and Kassav, petrified, runs back to Marchion Ro with his tail between his legs. In a brutal move, Ro maims Kassav, cutting off part of his hand to make an example of him. I don't really feel that bad for him, to be honest, but this is where Ro reasserts his dominance over the Tempest Runners, showing that as long as he controls the paths, they have no power over him. It's a terrifying display of control and cruelty. With the flight recorder in hand, Chancellor Lina So mandates that the Nihil be hunted down and brought to justice. The Republic is no longer just responding to the Great Disaster, they are actively seeking out the ones responsible. The Jedi Council also convenes to decide whether or not they will assist the Republic in this hunt. Jorah Mali, the newly appointed Marshal of Starlight Beacon and a badass Togruta, casts the deciding vote, saying, "We will do as the Force wills." Basically, if the Force wills us to kill a bunch of motherfuckers, so be it. The Jedi may not be soldiers, but they are fully committed to eliminating the Nihil threat. As Part 2 wraps up, the Republic and the Jedi are officially on a collision course with the Nihil. The stakes have never been higher, and with Marchion Ro pulling the strings, the galaxy is about to plunge into even greater chaos as we head into Part 3. Which is a great place for a little break. We'll be right back with more Tea Time on Tatooine. Citizens of the galaxy, the dawn of a new era is upon us. In just one standard month, the Republic's greatest achievement, Starlight Beacon, will come online. This state-of-the-art space station isn't just another technological marvel. It's a shining symbol of hope, unity, and progress. Positioned in the Outer Rim, Starlight Beacon will connect the core worlds to the furthest reaches of our galaxy, bringing us closer together than ever before. For too long, the Outer Rim has been disconnected and left to fend for itself, but no more. Starlight Beacon is here to bring light where there once was darkness. Its powerful transmitters will improve communication between worlds, boost signal strength, and ensure help is just a call away, no matter how far you are. And it's not just technology. Starlight Beacon is a neutral ground where diplomacy reigns and conflicts are resolved. It will house Republic representatives, scientists, medical teams, and, of course, the Jedi. In one standard month, the galaxy becomes a little bit smaller, the Outer Rim shines brighter, and all of us, as one Republic, will take the next bold step toward our greatest future. Because we are all the Republic, and together, we are unstoppable. Starlight Beacon, coming online in one standard month. Part 3, The Storm. As we move into Part 3 of The Light of the Jedi, the tension ramps up significantly. The galaxy is still reeling from the Great Disaster, but now the true threat begins to take shape, the Nihil. Up to this point, they've operated in the shadows, but in this section, we start to see the full extent of the chaos they're capable of unleashing. At the center of the chaos is the Battle of Kur, where Kassav and his Tempest are sent to intercept the Legacy Run's flight recorder. The flight recorder still may have some valuable information on it that Marchion does not want falling into the hands of the Republic. Expecting to face only a small Republic force, they instead find themselves confronted by Admiral Kronara's battle fleet. Admiral Kronara is basically the only named Republic military officer because they only have a defense fleet, but he's pretty cool. He's backed up by a significant force from the warrior planet Eriadu. Oh, did I forget to mention earlier that they're a warrior planet? Oops! Let's just say Eriadu is out for blood after the destruction of their moon. Kassav is caught off guard, and his first instinct is to run. But before he can escape, Marchion Ro sends him battle paths, hyperspace routes that allow the Nihil to make short, random jumps, sometimes shorter than a kilometer. These jumps create chaos, with ships appearing and disappearing in impossible patterns, crashing into both Republic ships and each other. The Republic fleet, unprepared for the Nihil's unpredictable tactics, begins to struggle. Admiral Kronara, appalled by the Nihil's dishonorable methods, like dumping toxic waste and launching explosive-laden escape pods, turns to the Jedi for help. Jorah Mali and Skier, a Trandoshan Jedi Master and frequent partner of Jorah's, lead a squadron of Vectors into a drift, a Jedi Vector battle formation, with Avar Kriss guiding them through the Force. But even with the Jedi's help, the Nihil's battle paths wreak havoc and the losses are devastating. Skier loses his arm, Jorah loses her life. Luckily, his arm will grow back, but it's small comfort when facing the loss of his longtime friend and companion. This is one of the more intense and chaotic battles we've seen in the book so far. What's fascinating here is the contrast between the Republic's orderly, honorable approach to war and the Nihil's utter disregard for any rules. The Republic is used to peacekeeping, not full-scale war, and suddenly they're up against an enemy who thrives on chaos and unpredictability. It's like watching a well-trained fighter go up against someone who fights dirty and is hitting the fighter below the belt. A lot. Hard. Ro then takes control of the path engines, forcing Kasav's ships to crash into Republic vessels. In the end, Kasav is captured by Ariadu's forces, who are out for revenge. The governor shoots him on the spot, and with Kasav's death, Marchion Ro tightens his grip on the Nihil, securing his leadership once and for all. One of the most interesting parts of this section is the internal power struggle within the Nihil. Marchion Ro is constantly outmaneuvering the Tempest Runners, who all believe they're smarter and stronger than him. Kasav, in particular, thinks he can go his own way, until he realizes, too late, that Ro has set him up. Ro sends Kasav and his entire Tempest to their deaths, using them as disposable misdirection to create the illusion that the Republic has defeated the Nihil completely. This is a great example of Marchion Ro's ruthless intelligence. He's not just a typical villain with brute strength or raw power. He's a master manipulator, setting up the Tempest Runners to fail while keeping himself safely in the background. It's like he's playing a long game of chess, and the Tempest Runners don't even realize they're the pawns until it's too late. Meanwhile, on Elfrona, Loden Greatstorm and his apprentice Bel Zettifar are still locked in their own battle. Well, at this point, Bel is safely on the ground, having saved that girl from a fall of several kilometers. That's right, we didn't really address the fact that the Nihil threw a child off of the ship while in atmosphere. Anyway, Bel's doing okay, but Loden's still in the thick of it. As he attempts to rescue the girl's father from the Nihil, things take a dark turn when Lorna Dee and her Tempest arrive. Loden is badly injured and ultimately captured by Lorna, along with the father. This is a heartbreaking moment, as Loden, one of the most powerful and respected Jedi Masters, is taken prisoner by the Nihil. Lorna Dee, realizing that capturing a Jedi will earn her favor with Marchion, delivers Loden to him along with the father they were trying to rescue. This moment really highlights just how dangerous the Nihil are. They're not just causing chaos, they're strategically targeting the Jedi. And capturing a Jedi Master like Loden is a huge victory for them. It's a chilling reminder that the Nihil are capable of far more than just random acts of violence. They're operating with a dangerous level of strategy. Back on the Gaze Electric, Lorna Dee delivers Loden's lightsaber to Marchion Ro. In this scene, we really see how dangerous Ro is, not just physically, but mentally. He swings Loden's lightsaber about, making Lorna nervous, and it becomes clear that he's been playing a long game all along. Ro tells Lorna that he sent Kasav to his death to make the Republic believe they've won, while in reality, the Nihil are far from defeated. He also admits that he deliberately set Lorna up to fail in her mission to destroy the flight recorder, weakening her position among the Nihil so that she would become more dependent on him. It's a masterclass in manipulation, and we're just starting to see how dangerous Marchion Ro really is. When Lorna asks him about ransoming the father, he casually swings Loden's lightsaber, cutting the father down without a second thought. He keeps Loden in a prison bay, surrounded by other civilian prisoners. He tortures the other prisoners, which in turn tortures Loden, his sensitivity to the Force causing him great distress in the face of so much pain. Let's face it, Marchion Ro is a dick. With the battle ended and a large part of the Nihil forces destroyed, the Republic moves forward with Chancellor Lina So's vision. Remember, they think there's a good chance that they have destroyed the entire Nihil organization, not just a third of it. The Starlight Beacon, a symbol of unity and hope for the Outer Rim, is about to be officially dedicated and brought online. Jedi from across the galaxy gather for the dedication ceremony. Bel Zettifar attends with his faithful Charhound Ember, but he's grieving the loss of his master, Loden. Despite the optimism of the ceremony, Bel can't bring himself to take the vows of knighthood without Loden by his side. As Loden's name is listed alongside the other fallen heroes, Bel tenses, unwilling to believe his master is dead. After a moving speech and rousing dedication, Elzar Mann and Avar Kriss find a quiet place and reflect on their roles in this new era. Avar reveals she's been asked to take Jorah Mali's place as the Marshal of Starlight Beacon, and that she's accepted. Elzar has a mission of his own, and they part ways, promising to stay in touch, which is easier now, with Starlight having been brought online. But as soon as Avar walks away, Elzar has a Force vision so powerful it throws him to the floor, bloodying his face. Jedi fleeing, evil sweeping across the galaxy, and an overwhelming sense of fear, as deep as the ocean he imagines as the Force. It's a haunting vision that suggests that the events of the Great Disaster and the Nihil are just the beginning of something far more terrifying. One of the key themes in Part 3 is unity versus chaos. On one side, we have the Republic, led by Chancellor Lina Soh, whose goal is to bring the galaxy together and unite the systems in peace. But the Nihil, under Marquis Ro's leadership, represent the exact opposite. They thrive on chaos, using fear and destruction to tear the galaxy apart. This tension between unity and chaos plays out not only in the battles between the Jedi and the Nihil, but also in the political challenges that arise as the Republic struggles to maintain order. Another theme that comes into focus is the idea of heroism in peace versus heroism in war. The Jedi have always been peacekeepers, and up until now, they've operated in a galaxy that has mostly known peace. But they're being forced into a new kind of role, or at least one they haven't played in centuries. One that challenges their understanding of what it means to be a hero. This isn't the Clone Wars, and the Jedi aren't soldiers. Yet they're being called upon to step into the fray and protect the galaxy from a threat unlike anything they've faced before. Part 3 of The Light of the Jedi really ramps up the tension, both in terms of action and the underlying conflicts between the Jedi, the Republic, and the Nihil. Marquis Ro's plans for the galaxy are only just beginning to unfold, and as the galaxy faces more losses, the stakes continue to rise. We're starting to see the cracks in the galaxy's peaceful facade, and it's clear that the Jedi are going to be tested like never before. This episode doesn't have a video component, but the audio will also be available on YouTube. As I look back on The Light of the Jedi, it's clear that this book, and the High Republic era as a whole, offers us a vision of the galaxy that's both inspiring and fragile. We see the Jedi at their peak, true guardians of peace, deeply connected to the Force, and operating with a freedom we don't often associate with the Jedi Order. There's a level of trust and respect between the Republic and the Jedi that feels almost idealistic. It's a vision of what could be before the darkness of the prequel era took hold. But even in this idealism, we're reminded that the galaxy isn't invincible. For all the unity and power we see, there are cracks beneath the surface. The Nihil emerge as a chaotic force that the Republic and the Jedi are simply unprepared for. The galaxy's been at peace for so long that when this new threat appears, they don't have the defenses or the resources to respond effectively. The Jedi, while powerful, are forced to get creative, and even then we see that their unity has limits. This book does a beautiful job of setting up not just a single conflict, but the beginning of a much larger story. The Great Disaster feels like the spark that's about to ignite something much bigger. There's a sense that this era of peace is on the verge of being shattered, and while the Jedi and the Republic are still standing strong, they're about to face challenges that will push them to their limits. I also wanted to talk about... Hang on. It sounds like we're getting an incoming transmission on a Rebel channel. Let me boost the signal.
This is Elle reporting in. I've uncovered something troubling. Over the past few months, I've noticed a massive diversion of Imperial resources, more than I've ever seen before. Credits, materials, personnel, it's all being funneled into some sort of project. But no one seems to know where it's going. I can't shake this feeling that it's somehow critical, but I don't know why. I started digging into historical records and I found something familiar. The only thing I could find that came close in scale was Starlight Beacon. Starlight was an enormous space station way back during the High Republic. It was meant to be a beacon of hope, a center for peace in the Outer Rim. The amount of funding and resources the Republic allocated to Starlight was astronomical and unmatched until now. I think we're looking at another station. Not a beacon, but a weapon. Not to unite, but to dominate. The rebellion needs to investigate before it's too late. History has a way of repeating itself, and I think the answers are in the past. If I'm right, we need to be prepared. but there's a surprising lack of information about what's happened to Starlight. Was it decommissioned? Maybe destroyed? It could have just been lost to space. It's almost like related records have been scrubbed from the archives. There's something here, something the Empire doesn't want anyone to find. Until next time, stay alert. L, out.
Wow. Sounds like the Empire's got something sinister brewing. Stay safe, Elle, and may the Force be with you. So, what did you think? Did the light of the Jedi resonate with you the way it did for me? Does this version of the galaxy, this idealized, hopeful republic, feel like something you want to dive deeper into? And what about the High Republic era as a whole? Are you excited to see where the story goes next? Do you, like our rebel friend Elle, see some interesting parallels between Starlight and another certain space station of epic proportions? If you liked this episode and would be interested in hearing more like it, let me know. This may be the direction that the Patreon episodes are going to take, so check it out. Plus, my next installation of the Darth Plagueis review drops on Wednesday. Go to patreon.com/teatime on Tatooine. We appreciate your support. If you have a question, comment, or other transmission you'd like to share, send it in to Teatime on Tatooine or shoot me a message on Instagram. That wraps up our show for today. This episode was written by me and was edited by me and Sam Kieffer, with additional editing by Nick Griffith. All show artwork is by Krishna Shetty, theme song and additional original music by Mike Barnett. Special thanks to Sam Kieffer for producing. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and tune in a couple of weeks for episode 16. You can find me at Teatime on Tatooine on Instagram. I'm Anna Trumbo, and remember, the Force will be with you, always.